In this video, we're going to be looking at Bubble's built-in input elements that you can add to your page designs. So we'll find these under the input forms category here in this list on the left. Again, remember that you can add more input elements to your page by installing plugins. You'll just have to search through the marketplace, but these are going to be your most popular ones. Inputs are much more interactive compared to the visual elements. Users can provide content by typing things in to single line inputs or multi-line inputs. They can make selections, so they can check boxes, they can choose from a drop-down, they can perform searches, they can also upload files like images and other file types. Okay, so the input elements themselves can provide a value of some sort based on the format of the content. So they can output a text, being the text that was typed into the input. They can output a date if they selected a date from the time picker here, the date and time picker here. It can output a file that was uploaded. And those values can be saved to your database. They can be manipulated in many different ways. We'll go over manipulating your dynamic data sources in later lessons, but for now I'm going to walk through each of these so you can understand what each of them are for and how to best leverage them. Let's start with the first regular input here. This is a single line input, so the user can type in something that is going to be more brief. If you're looking for bigger values like biographies, descriptions, then you likely want to go with a multi-line input, which is very similar but allows you to create paragraph breaks. Okay, so users will type into these inputs here. Now, when they type something in, the element will immediately provide what they typed in as the value of the input. Now, what I'm going to do here to show you this is add a text element next to the input to display dynamically the input. This is the single line input, this input's value. I'm going to copy this text and paste another text down below to output the multi-line inputs value. Okay, this is just to display what we've typed in. We haven't saved anything to the database, but this is essentially the expression you would use to capture these values and save them to a record. So if I type in coaching no code apps like this, you'll see it outputs that value as I've typed it in. Same thing here. This is my description for a job listing. And then this is a second line. Okay, so once I'm done typing, Bubble is going to display. It looks like the height of this text isn't tall enough to expand and display this. So we're going to need to make a modification there and expand the height. Of course, when you have your page set to a responsive setting, there's different kinds of manipulations you can do so that it dynamically expands in height for you and you don't have to anticipate that height. So let's type this again here. This is the first line, and then this is the second line. All right, just like that. So it saves that there. Or it's not saving it, sorry. It's not saving it to the database. It's just displaying it in real time as you've typed it in. Now from here, you can actually manipulate these values. So let's say I wanted to take whatever I've typed in and make it all uppercase, right? So I can refresh this, and in real time, it's just going to change the way that value is displayed back to the user. So if I, again, type coaching no code apps, where some of the letters are in lowercase, this is a manipulation to change that to uppercase. It hasn't been saved to the database in this way. We haven't done any workflows or anything like that, but this is just to show you how you can use that expression to manipulate. And you can, of course, save these values, manipulated or not, to your database through the workflows. Again, we'll go over those steps in later lessons. So let's take a look at some of the settings you have here around your input elements. So the first thing is that some of these inputs may have a place to create a placeholder. So you'll notice that when I don't have anything typed in, there's a placeholder there that says type here. Placeholders are basically a way for you to create some instruction for your user so that they know what they need to type in there, or maybe an example value, right? So if this is supposed to be a full name input where they have to type in their whole name, you can type in the placeholder like Jane Doe as an example, or you can make it even more literal like this, example Jane Doe, so that they know what's going on. By inserting a placeholder, you are not giving this input any kind of value by default. This is just kind of a behind the scenes placeholder that's optional. You don't even have to have a placeholder there. Some people like to design, their inputs without a placeholder and instead have a separate text element above that will give them that instruction or some kind of a label, right? Full name. It just kind of lives up there, up on top of the input. So it just depends on however you want to do the design. Now, if you wanted to automatically populate this input with some value, you can supply that in the initial content. Now, with some of the inputs, the initial content's actually going to be called the default value. And it will also go under other terms for other inputs, which we'll take a look at in a moment. So if I wanted to auto-populate this with the current user's first name, then I can pull that from the database using this dynamic expression, and it will automatically fill in with that value, but of course I can overwrite it from there. So I'm going to refresh the page here. It should still be logged in as the user that I have in my database. So here it's pre-populating with the word Gabby because that came from my database. Now, of course, I can override that. Let's say I want to change it to Jane, right? And from here, if I wanted to actually change my name in the database, I would trigger a workflow to modify my user record. Okay, let's take a look at some other details here around the property settings. This one, content format, will help Bubble understand what type of value is being typed in. This is not just for text. You can also type in, well, email and password are kind of special case text. At the end of the day, they still are text, but with an email format, Bubble will know to check if it's a valid structure or not. You know, it contains that @ symbol, it contains the domain. With the password, Bubble is going to conceal it with the dots taking place of each of your characters. So here you can see, right, there's my password. I just typed in a random set of characters there. But that way you can use that for your sign up or your login to protect it. You also have a few different numerical formats: integer, decimal, percentage, currency. And depending on what you choose, you may have extra options for how Bubble can display everything. Again, at the end of the day, the output of this element is still going to be a number, but the formatting helps Bubble display it in a way that makes sense in context. So here I'm going to say inputs value. We've got this set to a currency, and I'll say always show decimals. You can also set a minimum and a maximum if you check this, if you want to keep it within a certain range. So I'll show you what this looks like when I want to type in a currency. So if I type in, you see how there, before I type anything in at all, when I set focus to this input, it's automatically going to format it like this, so I can see very clearly that this is going to, what it's looking for is an amount of some kind. So let's say if I type in, 150, and the output is just that raw number, right? With the decimal, of course, but not with the formatting. If I wanted to display this number, right, that's the value of this input, with the currency symbol as well, then I can manipulate this value in a different way. You notice that I can do all sorts of math operations here. Again, I don't want to go too deep into these because we're going to go over all of this stuff in other lessons for manipulating and modifying your sources. But if I wanted to display it with that currency symbol, I could format my value as a currency, right? This is just a text element now that's displaying that value. And I could do the same thing, 2 decimal places, a comma for the thousand separator, and then the dollar symbol for the currency symbol. Okay, so I'll do this here again, 125 cents, right? And so now it displays it the exact same way. This is just the display, but the value of this input is a number in this case, okay? We also have phone number formatting. At the end of the day, that is just text that only accepts numerical values. You can set this up to have just plain text for international phone numbers, for having, the plus symbol or spaces or hyphens, because different countries will format their phone numbers differently. So if you're looking for phone number formatting, you're really just going to want to go with the simple text. There are plugins that can also help you with international formatting, but the Bubble does have a built-in one for US phone. Okay, so you have a number of different formats there that you can choose from, and depending on what you choose, some of the additional settings available to you here will reveal themselves so that you can modify things further. Now, depending on how you want to set up a workflow around this input, you may have a button to click so that it can save those values or do something with that value. You can have Bubble ignore the user from hitting the enter key to trigger those workflows on accident, or you can allow Bubble to trigger the workflow if they just hit their enter key. As long as there's a workflow set up that involves the input, then it will communicate that. but this is a nice way to prevent that from happening if you want to force the user to click something first, like a button. Okay, so just like the visual elements where we had the ability to make them not clickable, you can also make inputs disabled, where what that means is that I would not be able to type into the input. It would just prevent me from doing that. That can be helpful if you want to have an input to be able to do calculations, or if the user just doesn't have permission based on their user type, but somebody else does. So you can create conditions around when this input is disabled, or if you have certain requirements that need to be met before the input is enabled, you have control over that as well. Input should not be empty means that it is going to require a value to be filled into the input in order for a workflow that references it to run properly. So if I had a button that said, update my user record, right, update my profile or something, and I'm collecting all this information about the user, their name, their email, their address, their phone number, and so on, if I have marked any of those inputs as should not be empty, then the workflow that references those inputs will only run if all of the required fields have a value. If an input has been left empty and it's been marked as required, which is checking this box, then the workflow will not run. So just be mindful of that. It's a way to create built-in required fields. There are other ways for you to kind of enforce required fields without this setting by using conditions here at the input level or even at the workflow level. And as with most of your elements that you can design on the page, there are generally going to be styling properties that you can work with. So the color of the text that is typed in, the font, the size. You can also change the background color of the input if you'd like, changing all of this here. Same thing with the borders. You can remove the borders if you'd like. You have shadows. All of the standard formatting properties are going to be available for you there. Now with the multi-line input, we also have very similar settings. We have an ability to do placeholders, initial content. With the multi-line, you can also limit the number of characters here, and you have your standard formatting settings. Let's look at a few of our other input elements. I'm going to leave this text here for now with a couple of errors because I've removed the inputs, but I'm going to repurpose these to display their values. So the next one we have here is the checkbox. So the value of the checkbox is going to be a yes or no value, right? It's Boolean. It's either true or false. It's either checked or not checked. So the checkbox comes with a built-in label field. So I can say, I accept the terms and conditions, something like this. And so the user will be prompted to check that box. You can have it deselected by default. That's what this preset status is, or you can have it checked by default, or you can have that setting come in dynamically. Maybe whether it's checked or not is coming from the database, like a user preference that they might have selected before and they're coming back to see what their settings are. You can display what that selection was as long as you save it to their database record in a yes or no field. Remember, the value of a checkbox is yes or no. And so if you're saving this value to the database, you want to save it to a yes or no field. Okay, same thing for the requirement. You can make this required by saying this checkbox should be checked. You can also disable it if you'd like. And then again, you have your appearance settings. So I'm going to show you something here with the text element. If I want to display the checkbox's value, it's written a little bit differently. You have, instead of value, you have is checked or isn't checked. So it's basically making a statement, which is going to be true or false. So if I preview the page here with this expression of the checkbox is checked, if the checkbox is not checked, then it's a false statement. But if it is checked, it's a true statement, right? So this is telling me, yes, it is checked. If I deselect it, no, it is no longer checked. Okay, again, that's the output of this checkbox, is a yes or no. Now you can also reformat this to display your words in a different way. It's still a yes or no, but you can format that yes or no to say different things. Okay, so we can say TNS accepted versus TNS terms and service not accepted instead of yes or no. That way you have a little bit more, it's just easier to understand from the user's perspective, right? Like this, we're just repurposing that yes and no. Okay, so there is your checkbox. Now let's take a look at the drop-down input. So this is a great way to have the user choose one item from a list of items. This also has a placeholder setting, and you have a few different, actually just a couple choice styles that you can work with, either static choices or dynamic. Most of the time you will be using dynamic choices. These will come from your option sets or from your data records, but you do have the ability to do static choices as well. So for example, let's say we were choosing a favorite color, right? Red, blue, yellow. I can just type that in. This list doesn't live anywhere in the database. It just lives in the settings here of this dropdown. And so when I, actually before I preview this, let's have this text display the dropdown's value like this. Okay, so when I make a selection, it's just going to output my selection. And that is a text value, right? So if I choose red, yellow, blue, and I can save that text to some text field in my database if I wanted. The dynamic choices has to come from some dynamic data source. So for example, I can pull from my option set, day of week option set, which I have set up here. I think I have a few of them. I don't think I have all the days of the week. Yeah, I just have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay, so these would be the choices that populate the dropdown. So my choice source, I can choose specific days of week to make available in the dropdown, or I can just say, no, offer all of them, all of the days of week choices. And then the caption is just going to be the display property of that option set choice. Technically, you can add multiple custom attributes to your option sets. Most of the time, you'll just have your built-in display, which is literally just the labels for each choice. But that's why Bubble has this setting here to define the caption, because you could potentially have other attributes that you want to serve as the caption instead. But without custom attributes, your only option really is just the built-in display. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this page here. And there are my options. Notice that I didn't type those in here. It's pulling from my already defined option sets, which makes it really nice to work with, especially if I'm going to have this in many places in my app. I don't have to go configuring this multiple times. Okay, this is not displaying anything because the format of that value is no longer a plain text, but now it's actually an option set choice. You see there it evaluates to a day of week. So I need to go to some printable value, which in this case can be the display of that choice, which now is a text. And now that's compatible with my text element. Okay, so if I choose Monday, now it's able to output Monday, Tuesday, and so on. Okay, and as with everything else, removing the style with the dropdown will give you all of those appearance properties. Now, the search box is similar to the dropdown in that you need to set it up with a choice style, so static choices, dynamic choices. This one actually comes with a third style, which is geographic places. Now this one is actually hooked into Bubble's built-in integration with Google Places so that you can search addresses, points of interest, and it will auto-populate. The way that the search box works is that it is an autocomplete field. You can start to type and Bubble will automatically make suggestions based on what you've typed in to find a matching result. So depending on the choice style, that's where the results are going to come from. So for example, if we set this to geographic places, then I really should only be able to type in addresses or points of interest. So for example, if I do Empire State Building, right, you see how it's starting to auto-populate for me? And I can select one, and now the value of this search box element is actually an address because the format of the search box has been set up to geographic places. So in this case, you know, that search box's value is going to give me different address properties that I can get to. So if I just wanted to display that address, I would use that option there, formatted address. Okay, so it's an autocomplete. If I go to static choices, then I can type in the possible choices. So let's say again, red, blue, yellow. Oops. I want to do these on different lines so that they're different choices. And when I interact with this search box, I am searching, right? So if I type in RE, it's going to be able to pull up red, a partial search match, right? Or blue. So this is different from the dropdown in that I don't see everything all at once. I am looking for a specific option. So this is great if you have a very big list that you want the users to locate versus kind of scrolling through a drop-down list. And you can use the same thing with dynamic choices as well. You just have to define what your list of choices are, where they're coming from. So if I wanted my choices to come from job listings and be able to search job listings, Bubble's going to ask me, okay, which field do you want to search? And you can only search one field at a time here. Please keep in mind that this isn't the only way to do searches. There are many other ways to design search functionality. This is just a very quick, out-of-the-box capability that you have for doing an autocomplete search. But you can, of course, create your own custom autocompletes by getting a little fancier with mixing and matching different elements and logic. So if you select a specific data type, and of course you can constrain that search so that it only looks through specific records, you'll define which field to search off of. So if we go off of the title, that's the field that it will autocomplete against, okay? Now, when you have the dynamic choices in here, you're also going to see some other settings around, again, allowing them to trigger a workflow or not by hitting that enter key. How many results come up here, you can define that max list of results. And if the user is typing something in and there is no matching result, you could actually have the search box keep track of that typed in text, so that if you wanted to create a new record, for example, out of their typed in search term, you can do that through the workflows. Okay, so you can tell Bubble, I want to allow typed in content that doesn't exist in my list, so that I have the ability to extract that typed in value and create a new job listing out of it, for example, or a new color, a new category, whatever it is that they're searching through. All right, so that is our search box element. The radio button is similar to a drop-down in that, again, you provide your static choices versus dynamic choices. The difference here is that you're going to see all of your choices all at once. You don't have to click to open up a window. You can only choose one item at a time from the radio buttons, just like you can with the drop-down. I'm going to do the same setup here all days of week. Caption is the display. Really, the main difference is just the way in which you're presenting these choices, right? With radio buttons, you typically are going to have less choices to choose from. With drop-downs, it's a little bit more user-friendly to have a bigger list because they can kind of scroll through. They're not seeing everything all at once. But with the radio buttons, you're typically looking at a smaller set. But it's the same idea, right? They see their list of choices and they can make a selection, and then the value of this radio button is that selection. So I can see which one I've chosen there. It highlights for me. All right, so there is our radio button. Now let's move on to the slider input. This is great for working with numerical ranges. You can either have the user slide one value through the track here, or you can have them do a range. So think of like a price range filter for Airbnb. You want to look for rentals that are within a specific price range, or if you're looking to buy a home and this is a marketplace of real estate, you can look for homes within a specific sale price range. Okay, and so here you can define your minimum and your maximum. You can define what the interval is as they slide through that track. And the value of this slider is going to output either a single number or a numerical range. It just depends on what your slider type selection is here. You have some appearance properties to change how this all looks. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're going to display or save the value here that is coming out of your slider input. So let's refresh the page just so that you can see this functioning here. So by default, it's set to 0 to 10 as our range. And as I move it, right, it changes that number for us. Okay. Now with the range, the output's a little bit different. So the value is a numerical range in this case. So I could display the minimum of that range, maybe type in a hyphen here, and then display the slider output's value maximum. Depending on how you want to design this, those could be in separate text if you'd like to, right? So here it's going to show me both with those two separate expressions within my one text element. All right, moving on to our date and time picker. This is an easy way for the user to look at a quick calendar dropdown to choose a specific date, and you optionally can choose a time as well. That's up to you. Bubble works with dates in a consolidated format that is actually a date and a time. Now, presenting that value can happen many different ways. We actually go over this in more depth in a later lesson. because there's so many different manipulations of dates and times. But for selecting a date and a time, you can set this date picker up here and choose your input type. You have a couple of settings around, you know, what your available selected dates are. If you want to have a minimum date, maybe they can't choose anything in the past, for example, so you would set the minimum date to the current date and time. Okay, you can change what the day of the week that starts the week. You can change your time intervals, your time format, 12-hour versus 24. You can also provide an initial content. So if I want to default it to, you know, today's date and time, I can do that as well. And so output of this is a date value. Let me clear this out here and display the date and time picker's value. Let's format this. Well, actually, we'll just display it kind of the default format, which will be the date and the time. All right, so here's our date picker. You see that when I click on this, it shows me a nice calendar. Notice that everything before today is blocked out because I set that minimum date, but I can go anywhere in the future, choose a date, you know, choose a time from this drop down, and we have that output there. So the value of this is a date and time value, which you can save to your database to date fields. But just keep in mind that when you display it back to the user, you can show just the date component, just the time component. You can show both. You can format these differently. Lots of different things you can do from there. All right, now let's move on to the picture uploader and the file uploader. These are pretty similar. Files are more for, you know, PDFs, CSVs, any other format that's not a picture, whereas the picture uploader is specifically for images. Bubble does have two different field types in your data structure here. If we go to create a new field, you'll see we have file format and image format. So you want to be consistent in where you save each of these values in your database, that they go to the matching type. Technically, you can save images to the file field. You know, they are considered a file at the end of the day, but you won't often be able to go in the other direction. You won't really be able to save a file to an image field because if it's, for example, a CSV, that's never going to display in an image element because a CSV is a spreadsheet. It's not an image. All right. So pictures, you can pre-populate the uploader with an image if you'd like. A lot of times you won't have that in there. This is really meant to be more of an input, right? They click in order to upload their image for the first time, but you do have the ability to pre-populate it with something if you want. If you're just looking to display an image, then I would recommend you go with the image visual element instead of the picture uploader. Okay. When the user clicks on this, their file manager is going to open up automatically, whatever that is for their device. Okay, so if they're on their computer, it's their file manager. If they're on their mobile device, it might pull up, you know, ask them to choose a specific app to locate their images, maybe from their camera roll or some folder that they have set up on their device. Okay, you can also limit the file size for these images. If you take a look at Bubble's manual, it will go over some more details about what those sizes are. And then if we go over to the file uploader, we have very similar settings here. Again, you can provide a default file if you like, but clicking on this will allow them to upload one file. Now, if you need the ability to upload multiple files, that's actually one of our recommended plugins in a later lesson, but there is a plugin that gives you that capability that is published by Bubble. If you need to be able to, you know, upload multiples at once. That way it's a little bit more convenient for your user. Okay, so these are your file uploaders. Now these files, once they are uploaded, they will get saved to your file manager just internally in your app's file storage. But know that you can also reference those files in a workflow and attach them to certain records here. So if I had, you know, under the application, we have a resume field, which is type file, then I can save the value of that uploader to this field. It will be saved internally to my file storage. That's, you know, that's where it's hosted, but there's a reference to it here through this record, which makes it easy to access and know who it belongs to. All right, and that is all of our default input forms. Again, I encourage you to play around with these on a blank page like this so you can understand what all of your different settings are and the output values that come with them. We will go over dynamic expressions and modifying those dynamic values in a little bit more depth in later lessons. But once you get your hands on these, you'll start to become more comfortable with them. Again, remember that you can extend functionality and visual element capability by installing more plugins. So if you're looking for something specific that isn't exactly covered here, don't forget to check out that plugin marketplace. All right, we'll see you in the next video.